Hi, it's Griggs of Obsidian Wisdom. Today we discuss creating passive income streams for retirement and how to grow your money through investments. When it comes to investing your money, there are so many different ways to do it. This is something that's actually very close to my heart, a passion project, many could say. I remember when I retired from corporate America, I left the rat race and I started my own company, that it was a very difficult transition for me. The bills were still coming in every month, but the income was not. And the biggest thing that I learned when I started trying to figure out what the problem seemed to be is I didn't know how to create any other income other than active earned income. And the IRS says there are seven streams of income, and earned income is not the one that we want in retirement. So I had to start looking into the other six streams of income to figure out what I can do to make sure I have money coming in, even when I'm not actively working. Another way I've heard it described is I want to make more money in my sleep than I can spend when I'm awake. And I think that most of us, when we look at retirement, we're just trying to figure out how can I have a life of fulfillment, joy, and happiness without having to think, without having to contemplate, without having to consider any of my financial expenses? And there are studies out there that answer that question. When we find out that 65% of self-made millionaires have at least three streams of income, I know that that means I need to figure out what the streams are and which three make the most sense for me to have. If you're someone who's like, well, Dre, I can appreciate the three streams. That does seem like a reasonable number. But what if I wanted four, five, six? What if I wanted all seven streams of income? I can tell you that 45% of self-made millionaires have at least four streams of income, and around 32% of self-made millionaires have at least five streams of income. Now, when you get up to the six or seven, we normally just say five or more. But what I have noticed is that 65% of self-made millionaires have at least three streams of income. So for me, that seemed like the tipping point. That seemed like the magic number. Could I go more than that? Of course you can. And we'll go over some of the strategies for you today. Today, what we'll use is the future proof wealth formula, which is a part of the wealthy retirement system, which answers a couple of the questions that everyone has when it comes to retirement. Question number one is, how much money do I need to retire? Question number two is, how much can I spend without running out of money? Most of us are trying to figure out those two things when it comes to retirement. It is nerve wracking to go from active earned income to passively managed income. We have the money that we've been investing along the way, but we're not really sure exactly what to do to make sure we don't run out in retirement. And for that, we'll be able to pull this case study together, which is going to answer several of those questions for you. And what you can see is they make a combined $150,000 a year. We have their social security estimates, and we have the pension because the missus is a teacher and she's able to have $2,000 a month come from her pension. And that's going to be above most of the pensions that you'll see in Florida. On average, it's about $1,700, $1,800. When you look at the goals, when we sat and talked, the Mr. wanted to retire at 67, the Mrs. wanted to retire at 65. She wanted to go into what we call the drop program in Florida, which is part of the Florida retirement system at 60. And then she was going to come out at 65 and be completely done. They're currently 56 and 58, so the children have already left the house. They're financially independent, so they're able to lower some of their expenses, getting rid of most of their debt. They do still have a mortgage that's not counted in this number. They still have a car payment that's not counted in this number, and their overall credit card payments. And the reason is I don't want to double count it in their plan. So outside of those three things, they have $4,000 a month is what they're currently spending, and they expect to maintain that exact same lifestyle. We also have the average healthcare cost, which is going to be about $6,000 a year. And then you can see that number, what we did is we took the national average. We can always make an adjustment depending on what they have, but currently we're just using the national average. And then the long-term care, that's normally going to be, as I mentioned to you all, on average about 3 years. And it's going to be 7 out of 10 people over 65 years of age are expected to have a long-term care episode. And so as a result, we just put $70,000 in there today because if we're able to allocate the money towards it today, and then your money grows and outpaces inflation, then we don't have to have that amount that the future projection will have. But currently it's about $30,000 to $35,000 a year. And so for them, we said, look, let's go ahead and put in the plan 2 years of long-term care. And then we can see whatever adjustments that we can make preventatively to make sure that we have a very healthy retirement. And they want to have a $2,000 a week vacation. You can see they want to do that every single year. We want that to increase with general inflation. Next, the missus wanted to pick up gardening. She's kind of a homebody. In her mind, she wanted to be able to sit out on her porch, look at a beautiful garden, and read a book every so often. She wants to be able to attract butterflies so that she can have the beauty in her yard. And we said, okay, what would that look like? And we said, if we spend about $500 a year, that we should be able to have a pretty nice garden. They'll give us a little bit of room in case there's a bad season or we just water it too much or not enough, where she has that learning curve of gardening. And we also added a pickleball membership. And when we looked that up, that was about $2,500 a year is what the membership is. And it also allowed them to be able to take two family members, which is also pretty good because that means that they can invite some of their children and their grandchildren if they're ever interested in doing that. We also added an investment property for $300,000, and that's going to be above the national average. It's about $250,000 is the national average for a home purchase. And we can say, all right, we're about $3,000, and then we're going to get this when Mr. Couple is 60 years old, so about 7 years before his retirement. In his mind, we discussed being able to have the mortgage in a pretty good spot to where when he retires, this is going to be a pretty reliable stream of income. And the couple wanted to have their investment property paid off when he was thinking about retiring around 67 years of age. So in his mind, he wanted a 10-year mortgage. And while that can work, I told him one of the things I like to do, at least if we're able to trust ourselves to make the payment, is I'd rather have us with a 30-year mortgage payment and then we make the 10-year payment each month. Because there's a couple things that that does. Number one is if we run into an unforeseen event where something happens, maybe we have to go to the hospital or just we have to retire earlier, we're not locked into the 10-year payment of the monthly mortgage. We're locked into a 30-year payment of the monthly mortgage, which is going to be anywhere from a $500 to $1,000 per month difference. Where now, as a result, if there's no issue at all and there's no concerns and nothing happens where he's able to make that 10-year monthly payment, what ends up happening is, you know how when you make your payment, you have the amount that goes to principal and interest, and then everything you make over that goes straight to principal. Well, because he's on a 30-year payment, so let's say that that's $1,000 a month, and he's making a payment of $2,000 a month, that means the first thousand has principal and interest, but that second $1,000 of his mortgage payment is straight principal. And as a result, now he's going to be able to make that 10-year payment. And it's highly likely that he's going to have that completely paid off when he's thinking about retiring in 7 years. Now, you may be wondering while we're looking into buying a mortgage and even purchasing a business, and we're going to go into that a lot more detail later. But really, the idea is we want to create stable sources of income, and that amount depends on whoever you are. For a lot of people, when we look at an investment property, there's normally four benefits that we're looking at. Number one is they normally can create a pretty consistent stream of passive income, which works for a lot of people. Now, granted, that's not always going to be the case that you always have someone living in there. And so normally I will add a 5% vacancy rate, which just means that about 5% of the time, no one's living in there. So that cost needs to be allocated towards me. The second benefit of investment properties is it's actually an appreciable asset. So that means it's going to go up in value over the years. And so even if you don't like the rental income, you have something that you're actually tangibly able to hold, look at, and you can sell that tangible property in the future if you so need to help with your overall retirement investments. You'll notice that most Americans transfer their wealth through home ownership, that the majority of their net worth is derived inside of their home. Number three is investment properties can hedge against inflation as your rental income does tend to go up with inflation. So you're normally able to pass that cost along. So you're able to keep up with that. And one of the cool things about that is your overall expense of your mortgage stays the same. Because of inflation, your overall mortgage payment is actually decreasing as far as a percentage of your overall income, because every single year the cost of so many things go up, but every single year the cost of your mortgage doesn't. And for that, you really don't have to look much further than really just thinking about the cost of an automobile currently. I know some have automobile payments closer to $1,000. Well, there are some mortgages from people who retired in the 90s that's $1,000. And so you can see that as an overall percentage of your income, as the inflation brings the price of everything else up, your mortgage payment stays that same low amount while the rental payment increases. So it just increases the amount of money that you're able to generate. And the fourth benefit of having an investment property is you get to depreciate the assets. You also have the ability to make deductions against your mortgage payment, and you also have the potential to take advantage of capital gains in retirement. Now, I'm not just simply saying for this plan, hey, look, you're going to buy this house for $300,000 and then you're going to make $2,200 a month and then life's going to be rainbows and skittles. What we're saying is, all right, you also have to do your property taxes. You also have to have insurance. If there's any sort of maintenance that you normally have to have, and we just didn't put a number in there yet, but normally the good rule of thumb is somewhere about 1%. So if you think about 1% of this mortgage, you would expect to have the overall maintenance to be somewhere around $3,000 a year. Now, obviously, you're going to have some years that are lower, some years that maybe are even higher, but that's what we're normally going to say. We're being conservative on the rent increase. We're going to say rent's going to go up with 2%. And the appreciation, I think that that's 3.63. And that's what we placed in there. The interest rates are somewhere going to be around 7%. They both have great credit, but the interest rates are a little bit higher right now. They're going to be 20% down on the mortgage. For it to work for most people, you're going to have to put 20 to 50% down if your plan is to be able to net cash flow right out the gate. Now, in this particular situation, because they still have the mortgage, that wasn't as big of a deal for them. And so we did not need to worry about emptying and depleting any of their other investment. Next, we'll look at purchasing a business. Now, this is going to change because we don't know what business is going to be available when they purchase it in the next 10 years. But what I did do is I was able to find them a case study, an example, and then we're able to show them how reasonable and how possible it is to where you're really able to have this advanced leverage when you talk about real estate and business purchases. We're purchasing a property for $300,000, but we don't have to put down $300,000. Instead, all we have to do is put down 20%, and that's only $60,000. So I'm going to put $60,000 down, and I have a $300,000 property. So technically, if I had $300,000, instead of me buying one property for $300,000, I could buy five properties for $300,000 because I only have to put $60,000 down. Now, of course, I know that we have taxes and different costs, but I'm just simply saying for the purpose of this example, I can buy five properties for the same amount instead of one. That is leverage because now I have the ability to have a monthly mortgage of $2,200 times five. So now I have over $10,000 every single month coming in because of my investment properties that only have to put $300,000 down, which is a pretty nice return on my investment. Now, the thing about leverage that we don't talk about as much is what if everything doesn't go well? And I think that that is a risk that we don't talk about nearly enough. So in this situation, even though I put $300,000 down to get the five properties, I'm actually on the hook for 300,000 times five, which is 1.5 million. So if everything goes badly and I lose every single property, I'm on the hook for 1.5 million, even though I only had $300,000 in my bank account because I only had to put down $60,000 for each property. That is what we often overlook, but it is something that you have to consider. The ability to leverage works both ways. There's good leverage and there's not so good leverage. So if I have five good properties, and I'll go over some examples of what makes a good property, and then I'm comfortable in that and I have a good strategy in place, I'm able to get my return back pretty nicely. I'm making $10,000 every single month. I'm literally making $120,000 from a $300,000 investment. You're not going to be able to get an over 50% return on your investment in many other avenues. When you're looking at real estate, you normally have three choices. Number one is you can invest in the stock market through a REIT, a real estate investment trust. This is when you find other companies who have a real estate management team and they simply want the money so that they can go and buy the properties that they're looking for. You may be interested in this. If you've ever seen a mall or want commercial real estate, everybody talks about commercial real estate, but it's kind of expensive. And it may make sense for you to partner with someone that already has a lot of that wisdom. So that way you don't have the learning curve, but you're more like a silent partner. You give them the money, they find the properties, and then they give you the return. There's a lot of benefits inside of a REIT, including the tax structure, and they have to pass over a significant amount of their profits to the shareholders. Next, if you're someone who's not very excited about investing in the stock market, but you don't necessarily have the amount of money needed to buy the property outright yourself, you may look at real estate crowdfunding. This option gives the ability to pull your money together a lot like a REIT, and then you're able to go out and get the properties. But for this particular option, you're going to go to a crowdfunding platform, and then they will have the terms and conditions, and then they will give you the properties, and then you simply get to allocate your money towards it, and then they pay you out whatever it is per month. There's lots of crowdfunding platforms out there. I've seen some with gold. I've seen some with lottery tickets. I've seen some with art. There's some where people have emergencies and they raise money, they crowdfund together to pay for someone's surgery or for someone to have some sort of treatment. I've seen it where maybe someone passed and there was something crazy that happened and they just didn't have life insurance. And then they raise money to be able to pay for the funeral and different things like that. So crowdfunding is not new and it's done in a variety of ways. And this one would be particularly someone would do a crowdfunding platform. They would have the property. They would disclose the property to you. That's one of the requirements by the SEC as far as crowdfunding. The idea is if someone doesn't have the information to make a reasonable decision, then they normally have to be considered what we would call an accredited investor. Someone who has a lot of that background information so they won't be taken advantage of. But because everyone's not an accredited investor where they're not worth $1 million or they don't make $250,000 a year, then that may make sense for them to go into this opportunity. But because it's a higher risk, we're going to go ahead and make sure that they are disclosed what the property is so that they can have as much information as possible to make a sound decision. Now, if you are someone who does have the money available, then it might make sense for you to look at just buying the properties outright. Now, I do know some people that are just not interested in having tenants. They don't want to manage people. They don't want to have to evict people and do all these other things. So sometimes they'll buy the properties and they'll have someone else manage the properties for them. But if you are someone who's interested in purchasing property yourself, I'll give you 5 tips of things that you normally want to look for just to give you a great head start. Number one is we want to look at rental demand and the appreciation of the properties in that area. So normally we'll look at things from a zip code perspective. And if you're in a certain area where there's a lot of people trying to rent out there and it's appreciating in value, those are the two things that we're looking at when we're purchasing a property from a financial aspect. I want to know how much I can charge in rent. I want to know what's the likelihood of my place being filled with occupants on a consistent basis. And I want to know that if I decide to sell this property later, how much appreciation can I expect? Number two, we need to know what the cash flow potential is. So you guys seen where I showed you where you'll need to know how much you're going to pay in the mortgage, for insurance, for taxes, for maintenance and groundkeeping. All these things add up and you have to have a certain amount of cash flow for this to work. So if each property nets you a $500 a month cash flow, then you can say, okay, well, $500 a month, that's $6,000 a year. If I'm able to have five properties, then that means I'm going to have $30,000 a year from these rental properties, at least until I'm able to start paying off the mortgage, and then it's going to increase as well. These are all things that you want to be able to take a look at because you don't want to buy a property that's negative. Now, you may because you have a longer term approach, but if you're trying to have access to income and retirement, then we need to make sure that this property is structured in a way where you're able to cash flow and have that income in retirement. Number three is you want to have a screening process for your tenants. There's really two things that you're trying to protect yourself from here. Number one is the person defaulting and not making the mortgage payment. Number two is the person damaging your property. Now you have to replace it and kick them out. If you're able to have some sort of a screening process in place, whether it's your credit score, whether it's your first and last month's rent, however that looks like, you need to have a process in place that makes it more likely that the right people live in and that the wrong people are found out early so that you can keep them from coming in and damaging your property. Number four is your overall rental management strategy. You have to have some sort of a strategy in place to make sure that everything goes as best as it possibly can. A lot of the times you may visit the property once a month, once a quarter. It needs to be inside of your rental agreement so that way they're not surprised. Whatever the amount of notice that you need to give them, or if there's no notice at all, you need to be able to review your property before things get really out of hand. If they're destroying the walls, if they're messing everything up, if they're ripping up the carpet, if you're able to go once a quarter, once a month to just look at the property to make sure nothing crazy is going on, then you're in a good spot. You may need to go to see if more people are living there than you had originally intended. If you're able to see that other people are living there, then maybe that changes the terms of the agreement. And if you wrote in your agreement that they can't have pets and you visit and they have pets, well, what is your recourse after that? All of this goes into an effective property management strategy. Now, because of that, that's why a lot of people just end up outsourcing that. They just hire someone else to manage the property for them. And then they send them the monthly statement that says, this is how the property is going. These are pictures of everything that's going on. And then you're able to say, okay, I know I'm in a pretty good spot. Another thing that you often want to have in that management strategy is how am I going to have it when they leave? Do we have to have the house professionally shampooed or does it need to be professionally painted where they show me exactly what it was that they did and who they paid, where I see the receipts? All of this goes into an effective property management strategy. And you want to be able to put that in place ahead of time. So it's a part of the lease when they sign it and they're well aware of everything that's expected of them and everything that's expected of you. How often you do the repairs? What is the timeline that you expect to be able to get back to them? Do they have a certain number that they call? Do you pay everything up front or do you have an investigation where if it's their fault, then they pay it? All of that stuff has to be determined ahead of time, which is why a lot of people sometimes end up going towards the REITs because it just feels like a lot for them. But at the same time, if this is something that works for you, because I do meet people that are like, I want real estate. I don't want the stock market. I grew my wealth in real estate. I understand the industry. I'm very comfortable there. Then we can put a strategy in place that's very comfortable for you. And the fifth strategy when it comes to evaluating real estate property is you got to be able to reevaluate it. There are market trends that are going on. There's new and up and coming areas. There are sometimes declining areas. People move in and they could change the whole dynamics. The school goes from an A to a D school. You need to stay informed of that area. You want to be the first one to know that if something changes, that you're going to sell the property and move to a different one. A lot of times people ask me, well, Dre, how do I know when to sell? And for me, the answer is always the same. You sell when there's a better investment opportunity. Now, it just doesn't mean that someone promises something like a crypto or the next meme stock or something of that nature, but you actually have the numbers and the data and the research and the analysis to sit there and say, you know what, this is the next best opportunity. I'm going to put a portion of my money towards that. I'm going to put all of my money towards that. But normally you're not going to sell anything until you have that strategy in place of where you're comfortable moving your money next. So I'm going to buy this business for $160,000. I'm expecting the business to appreciate about 3% every year. We're relatively conservative because that just is what we want to do because whenever we beat that, we feel a lot better. But if we're able to make a plan that works with this, then we're saying, okay, I feel relatively good that I'm going to be okay. And then you can see that they have their annual distribution, which is just your cash flow. They cash flow $90,000. Cash flow is just the cash in your bank account. And then they give themselves as far as the annual income of $50,000. So they reinvest $40,000 into the business, which they have that option, but they technically could take the entire 90,000 out. And then that could be their cash flow every year. Again, you can see I invested $160,000 in the business and I'm able to get $90,000 out the first year. My expected income growth is about 1.5%. I'm being relatively conservative, as I mentioned. And then you can see the down payment. We're going to actually purchase this house 100% in cash when the Mister retires. So there is no loan amount. There is no loan term. Now, granted, you could. I know there's lots of people that talk about buying the 0% down. But when you go in there and say, hey, I'm going to buy this in cash, people feel really good about that. They're saying, you know what? I actually think I want to sell to Dre because Dre is not going to be having me go to the bank and get these payments and installment loans or seller financing and all that stuff. Dre knows what to do with his business and he's going to turn it around. Now, before you say, well, Dre, that's completely made up, there is no way that you could possibly do that. Let me give you an example. So we're looking at this business. Remember, this is just an example to show you that it is possible. They're going to be retiring in about 10 years. So this is not going to be something for them. But I'm on bizbuysell.com and you can see that this business right here is for $157,000. You can see that it cash flows $95,000 a year. You can see where the rent is. It was established in 2015. And then they have the FF&E, and that's just like furniture and fixtures and equipment. And that's about $50,000. And you can see the gross revenue is about $250,000. So they're saying, hey, this is what we gross as a business. We make $250,000 a year. When you take all of the expenses and pay them out, we're left with about $95,000. Now, granted, when you're looking into a business and purchasing one, there is a lot of due diligence that goes into that process to see whether these numbers are real, whether they are doing things to make the funny math work. There's a lot of questions that we end up having. But if you're just simply saying, okay, all of this checks out, you can see that you're able to leverage your money pretty nicely, where you're putting $157,000 into an asset and then you're getting $95,000 out that next year. That is going to be a pretty nice return. Now we're over a 50% return versus the real estate. So that's another reason people like to invest in business as far as an asset class. When I normally start looking at properties, I need to know the location. I need to know whether or not that property is actually in a high trafficked area. I probably need to see what the employees' thoughts are. Are these employees going to come with me? Is this something I can operate passively? Is there someone I could put in management? Does this $95,000 include the salary that goes towards the business owner, or is the business owner not taking out any money? And so I actually have to deduct that. I'd like to know how long the business has been in place, whether it outlasted things like COVID. Those are normally important. I need to know why they're selling the business, because if you're looking for a passive business opportunity and the person's like, well, I'm selling the business because I'm retiring. In your mind, you're like, okay, well, this person's pitching this as a passive opportunity, and yet they're not going to keep the business, even though they said it was passive. That might mean that this is not a passive business, that I'm going to have to be actively working in this business. And as a result, you just want to know why the person's retiring. Is it a divorce? Okay, well, that's different. Is someone getting sick? Again, okay, that's different. But if they say that they're retiring, and you may have to put a little bit of work in because obviously they have a broker and the broker's going to say the same thing. We're going to sell this as a passive business. And if you say that you're retiring, they're going to know that that means that this business may not actually be something that they can operate passively. But it lets you know the county or the real estate is leased so they don't own it. You can see the square footage of the place and when the lease expires, the number of employees. All these are things that you're going to want to have a discussion with. Now, naturally, is this something that you're very interested in? Were you a dancer when you were younger and you look forward to operating this business? Or is this just the cash play? You're looking at the amount of money that you have to put in versus the amount of money that you're going to get out. We have to understand our goals because it will let us know how likely our success is going to be. So you can see when you look at this retirement plan for the couple that they had, and we'll look at the balance sheet over here on the side. You can see that inside the bank account, they had about $100,000 in cash. They have $500,000 in investment in the stock market. A lot of that is through their 401k. You see that the real estate, the property is about $450,000 with a mortgage of about $282,000 left. They had credit card bills. You can see they have about $25,000 in total credit cards, and the $10,000 is what was left on their overall car payment. And what you do is you'll total all the assets, you'll total all the liabilities, and then when you subtract them, that's their net worth. You can see that the retirement plan, I'll go into details for you on that, that we're estimated to have 100% likelihood of success, which is pretty nice. The goal is normally to be around 80 or higher. And all we're doing is we're saying that we run about 1,000 scenarios And in these thousand scenarios, and a variety of different things happen, whether you retired and the market went down immediately, whether you lost your job a little earlier, whether inflation is higher, whether you have healthcare issues, whether Social Security ended early, all these go into deciding these thousand scenarios. And you can see that we're expected to have about 4.4 million when it's all said and done. You technically can have as low as 1.7 million, or you can have as high as 10 million. So when you look at these numbers, you say, okay, well, Dre, are you saying that there's literally a 0% chance? Well, no, of course not. If for some reason there was aliens coming and invading, or there's a war started between a bunch of nuclear countries, there are things that can happen that would significantly alter even the best of financial planning situations. When you look at the overall strategy that we put in place, you can see that they're actually able to generate an additional $400,000 per year from the original plan. Now, the original plan could be fine, right? They have $500,000 already set aside. They're making a good amount of money. They're already allocating. You can see here about 12% of their salary towards investment. So they're in a pretty good spot. It will probably be okay. One of the things that I like to look at is really from a tax perspective. How can we design things that may generate more revenue for you? Because we don't want to be paying too much in taxes when we retire. And when you look at what they were originally doing, you see that the husband in the 401k was putting 15% of his salary. I find that to be common because we're just not 100% sure where to put our money. We lowered that to 5%. And the reason we did that is because we don't want to just be diversified from an income perspective. We also want to be diversified from a tax perspective. So if you have all of your money that's being put inside of a pre-tax account, money that hasn't been taxed yet, there's a couple things that you may be concerned with. Number one is this is going to be taxed as regular income in retirement, which is probably not going to be the most favorable tax rate that you can have. Number two is you have these things called required minimum distributions, which is a very fancy way of saying that once you reach 73 years old, there is a certain amount that you have to take out every single year, or else you end up with a 50% penalty on the amount that you should have took out. When you think of that, that might mean that you have to take out more money than you want, and that's going to put you in a higher tax bracket. I have another video where I go into great detail about some of these tax strategies, and I'll put a link to it for you. But I want us to have a lot more flexibility. If my money is already an after-tax asset as my regular stock market investments, that's where your taxable investments are. And then you're able to say, okay, well, now I can decide how I want to do this. And it also opens up another stream of income. When you invest in the stock market, you now have access to capital gains. That's just a more favorable tax treatment for your income as long as you keep your money invested for a year and a day. And then you can also talk about your rental income and the investment. You can talk about profits from the business. Is treated differently than your earned active income. It's much more favorable. It's seen as being a net positive for the overall economy. And so the government wants to incentivize people to do that. So we went from 15% to 5%. We then increased the brokerage investments to $10,000 a year. And you can see that we're still able to maintain the ability to retire, and we have $400,000 more. They're going to take Social Security at retirement age. So 65 for the missus, 67 for the mister. And then we have the debt plan that we put in place, and I'll show that to you. All we really did was adjust the way that they paid their bills. We just paid the highest interest rates first to the lowest interest rates last. They didn't really need to add any more money towards their overall debt because it actually was decreasing the amount of money that they would have for retirement. Because sometimes if you have a really nice investment strategy in place and you have the choice between paying your overall debt and making extra payments on that, or you can put the money towards your investments. Well, your investments are generating a higher percentage return than paying off the debt. That technically means from a financial perspective that putting the money in your investments and then taking the returns of your investments to pay off the debt would be a more efficient use of your money. Now, granted, there is a lot more that goes into financial decisions than just whether it makes financial sense, but it's just simply to let you know that that is a scenario that does happen. The distribution strategy, I'm going to go into that with you. And basically what we added for them was a couple things, and I'll show that to you in a second. And you can see where we added the rental property at 60 years of age. And then you can see where we purchased the business, and that was at 67 when we had the retirement. And then when you look at the distributions, you can see that we're able to generate another $250,000. And that's basically because what we did is we said, anytime we have income tax below 22%, we want to do a Roth conversion to fill the bracket up to that 22%. We want to make sure that we're paying at a minimum 22% in taxes. And you may be saying, well, Dre, why would I want to do that? And the reason is because our goal is to make sure that you have the most money in retirement that is not being taxed. When you look at this, if you have the required minimum distribution starting at 73, if you had to take the money that we were able to spread out over a 10-year span and you started taking it here because you had $500,000 in your 401k, well, that would have pushed them into a higher tax bracket. They would have been paying more in taxes, even though they probably wouldn't have netted more as far as their ability to spend their money. But because we're able to do those Roth conversions, very small ones each year, they were able to have a lot less money that was going to be taxable, and they had a lot more flexibility to where in retirement, they were able to have the income, but they didn't have any of those required distributions that would push them into a higher tax bracket. And you can see that with the proposed plan, we have 11% of their money is going to be tax free because of those Roth conversions that we're able to do, very small ones, but very manageable ones. And when you compare that to 0% being tax free over here, that is where they're able to generate that extra $250,000 because of that overall strategy that was used. And when you put all that together, that is how we're able to get to 100% of their income is stable. They're very comfortable. They have a business that's generating the cash flow. They have the real estate property that's generating the cash flow. They have the investments in the stock market. They have a diverse stream of income so that they're able to say with comfort, I know I'm going to be okay when everything is said and done. When you want to look at the cash flows, you can see here that we're at 58 and 56. We make about $150,000 a year. And then you can see what we would expect to have an increase in our salary just based on inflation, just regular inflation. And then you can see at 60, what do we go do? Well, you can see that we spent that $62,000. That was the 20% down payment. And it's not at 60,000 anymore because we had the appreciation of a couple of years go by. And so now it's $62,000. And then that is generating us $26,000 a year. That's what our rental income is generating us. We put $62,000 down, $26,000 is what we're able to generate a rental income. And then we have that 5% as far as people not being there. We have the cost and the expenses being in there. And then you can see we have the money that's being generated from us working, and we have the money that's starting to be generated from our investment property. The next move you'll see is we have to spend $211,000. That's when we purchased that business. Yes, it was at 167,000, but again, we have it going up with inflation and appreciating each year. So the $160,000 that we were able to find today, when we actually look at 67, that's going to be $211,000. And then you're able to say, okay, I got that property. And then we start going through the rest of our goals. So that's our pickleball and that's our traveling with our family. And then you can see that how much we have and that we're spending. You can see the outflows of our money. You can see how much that we're making from the investments that we have. And you're able to see that we always have the money that we need, at least based on this. And as a result, we're normally in a pretty good spot. Now, granted, we do stress test these, which is, as I mentioned to you a little bit earlier, all stress testing is basically saying that if everything doesn't go peaches and cream, that if for some reason the market drops 20% or Social Security is reduced by 20%, that we have taxes expected to be 20% higher, or that we live 5 years longer than we expected, all of these go into your stress test to see what is the likelihood of us achieving our goal. And you can see that all of these scenarios that we're still going to have the exact retirement lifestyle that we were looking for. Now, when it comes to things like Social Security, it's always going to show that it's optimal for you to take it at 70. And the reason is because we're planning for you to live until 90. And so as a result, of course, if you're going to be able to live that long, then it makes sense for you to wait. Normally, on average, it's going to be about 12 years. If you believe that you're going to be around at like 82 or something like that, then normally it makes sense for you to wait. If you're not that certain, then it makes sense for you to start taking your Social Security out a little bit earlier. But as far as the numbers go, you get about an 8% return on your Social Security because that's how much it goes up every year that you wait. You get another 8% as far as your monthly income every year that you don't take out Social Security, maxing at 70 years of age. Now, with that being said, depending on your overall health concerns, your life expectancy, family health, and all those other things that go into that decision, not to mention whether you have another source of income to be able to fund your retirement, not including Social Security for those bridge years, is why this decision is very unique to each person. It's not something that I could just say, hey, this makes sense for you and this doesn't make sense for you without looking at your overall history and other goals and considerations. When it comes to Medicare, when it comes to being able to do that, there's a certain things that you want to think about. And basically the way that you think about it is, what am I going to do? And then we're able to tell you what your consideration should be. Because some of them have in-network doctors and some have where you have a doctor when you're traveling abroad. But if you don't have the right coverage, then you may not have the proper healthcare coverage that you need. But if your location consideration rate for them was they're traveling, so we said, okay, if you're a traveler, then that means you need to be able to see a doctor in multiple locations. Health considerations, you say, hey, I see a doctor frequently and I have different concerns. And then your risk considerations so that for a more predictable income. Well, we would come down here and we would say, okay, which one makes sense for that? So Medicare Advantage gives the ability to have dental and vision coverage. Now, if you're someone who wants a set monthly amount, then you can see that that also means that you would be someone that would want out-of-pocket limits, which you're able to have inside of this program. And then, of course, your Medicare A, B, you already have that, so you're good on that. Now, if you're someone who had a different consideration, so if you just had Medicare A, B, and D, where you didn't have any supplemental plan, you didn't have any advantage, Well, that one gives the ability to have flexibility on your doctor, so you can go kind of anywhere. But it doesn't make sense if you want a predictable cost of out of pocket expenses because you have those limits and you're going to pay for each visit, each limit. And there's little that we can do to help you inside of just your regular traditional Medicare A, B, and D. And then if you want to see your doctor more frequently, because you have to pay those deductibles and copays, it just doesn't make a lot of sense for you. As a result, if you're someone who has those situations, then it normally makes sense for you to choose something like Medicare for A, B, D, and then a Medigap to fill in those gaps. So if you want to travel and have flexibility, that's fine. You're able to do that. If you want to see a doctor more frequently and you have no concern about copays and deductibles adding up, well, it doesn't matter because you have low deductibles when you have Medicare A, B, and D. And if you prefer more predictable costs, then you have those out of pocket limits that are inside the Medigap programs and you have those different reimbursements and everything. So it just works for you. We would actually look through this to decide what makes the most sense for you based on your overall retirement lifestyle so that you're very comfortable and confident when you're choosing your Medicare coverage. If you found value in this video, go ahead and subscribe for additional insights on how to create your own wealthy retirement system so that you can worry less and live more. Until next time, stay safe and enjoy life.